Welcome back to the channel, everyone. This is Snoo coming to you with a brand new League Start build guide and my choice League Starter for upcoming patch 3.25, Settlers of Kalgur. This time featuring Freeze, elemental hit of the Spectrum on the new Warden Ascendancy. Initial preparations for this build assumed the Deadeye Ascendancy would be a front and center pick, yet the winds of change would prove favorable this time, gifting us with an unforeseen Ranger Ascendancy rework that fits markedly well with the theme of a build that was already sporting items like these. The Raider Ascendancy has now been retired, and taking its place is the Warden, which is slated to become the strongest Ascendancy in the game for any build that is focusing heavily on elemental ailments. And judging by the items shown here, you can probably tell this build was already designed with that sort of thing in mind. In particular, the intent to abuse the most powerful defensive layer in the game, Freeze. Why fuss about defenses when you can totally stop a whole slew of enemies right in their tracks? Here's a brief throwback to a few weeks ago when I began testing this similarly spec'd and undergeared variant on a Deadeye in a Tier 17 Delirium map.
Deeper Deli here, still able to clear all this stuff, guys. I mean, got the AoE baked into elemental hit. It clears almost as well as Lightning Arrow does in general. And I don't know, here's the number, the DPS number, if that means anything to anyone. More rares. You know, even if I have to take some hits every now and then, it's fine. I have over 80% evasion. I have a 10k max fizz hit. Things barely get a chance to even hit me, and that's the only reason why I'm not...
The results were astounding, to say the least, and the community at the time agreed we were on to something special. Then, when news broke of the upcoming Ascendancy reworks, everyone was clamoring for a shift in the direction of the Warden, which leads us to here and now, the official build guide video for one elemental hit of the Spectrum Warden. For the first time ever, I'm formally recommending this League Starter build for new and veteran PoE players alike, as I believe the build will overperform to such a degree at a much earlier snapshot in time than what is typically observed for this level. The following background footage showcases a Ranger attempting to do a Legion Dune strategy at the very earliest stages of endgame gearing, with only level 19 gems, no 6-links, and no cluster jewel setup. In fact, it's still using this keystone most associated with leveling prior to endgame and swapping in crit. What you see before you is a testament to the power of Freeze. Without it, this character would likely be in over its head and dying on the regular this early in its character progression. Furthermore, this recording took place in advance of the new Warden Ascendancy release, which means this showcase is only representative of about a third of the build's true damage potential and a tiny fraction of its freeze potential. That said, for all the Deadeye purists out there, you can rest assured your Ascendancy will still make for a high-powered variant of the build presented before you, and may in fact be superior at highest gearing thresholds. Either way, the main path of building links for both the Warden and a matching Deadeye variant can be found in the description of the video. With all of that out of the way, let's begin by exploring the new Warden Ascendancy utilizing the recently updated path of building for 3.25. Many build creators are boasting the Warden's damage potential, and it's true. To be fair, for Deadeyes, some of that damage loss is made up for in speed and clear. But it isn't the raw damage that makes the Warden really shine. By my count, there are 3 very interesting tech components to the build that tie directly into the new Ascendancy notables, each one representing a different element. Firstly, there's Oath of Winter, which extends the freeze duration of any hit that meets the minimum threshold of 0.3 seconds to 2 full seconds. Just let that sink in for a moment. It also makes freeze-capable hits that fail to meet the necessary minimum threshold grant Hoarfrost, a stacking debuff that ultimately forces a 2-second freeze onto an enemy after taking enough hits. Both of these occur without any internal cooldown, which will no doubt provide unprecedented levels of safety and ease in otherwise rippy maps, as this fast-attacking build was already pulling a lot of string to unlock permafreeze the hard way. Which is to say, if you are all too familiar with the Glass Cannon Bow Ranger archetype, then I'm telling you, you've never experienced anything like what this has to offer. I can't wait to see it for myself. Secondly, there's Oath of Summer, which trades Ignite for Scorch and then doubles its effectiveness. This has interesting implications in the face of the typical meta choice mastery that reverses enemies' elemental resistances a quarter of the time. Opting out of that, we can now scale elemental resistance reduction on enemies in more unconventional ways, like the Curse, Elemental Weakness, which proves both more reliable in maps and even more damaging than Mark on Hit Sniper's Mark. It'll be hex touched into a pseudo 6-link Lionized Paws with additional supports that support a bit of cold damage with the help of Ahuana's Bite and a lot of fire damage with the help of Heat Shiver, thereby granting even harder scorches, which further scale the size of all elemental hits and thus making enemies even more likely to get frozen. These synergies are then compounded by our gloves of choice, Painseeker, which triples the effective hit thresholds of all 4 inflicted elemental ailments, Chill, Freeze, Shock, and Scorch. Thirdly, there's Oath of Spring, which changes how Shock works. It hard caps Shock at 2% and then grants up to 50 stacks for a total combined effectiveness of 100%. Hitting and maintaining 50 stacks of Shock will prove somewhat difficult even for fast attacking builds, as one Shock only lasts a default 2 seconds, and every Shock must still hit the minimum threshold of 5% to be applied. Thanks to Painseeker gloves, hitting this threshold will be all too easy for this build, not just for a primary attack, but all hit sources, including Artillery Ballista and Rain of Arrows. Despite so many hits going out in succession, it's still unlikely for us to reliably sustain all 50 stacks of Shock in chaotic combat situations, which is why Defiled Forces is anointed on the amulet. With auto-casted Rain of Arrows linked to Hex Touch elemental weakness, enemies will be getting cursed every second of combat, resetting all shocks to their full duration, not to mention all chills and ignites. But wait a minute, how can we ignite if all ignites get transformed into Scorch? It'll be all too easy for a bow build. Just squeeze in a Manaforge Miro Arrow of Bombarding Clones and link it to combustion support. Now, Defiled Forces has the important task of rolling shocks and ignites, and in doing so, we've just unlocked a 5th elemental ailment. Why might this be of importance, you ask? Well, I think it's time for us to show off some of our new bling. The new and improved The Taming Ring, on top of giving us some much needed all elemental resistances, now grants up to 40% increased damage per elemental ailment type on the enemy, which can be further magnified with Catalyst. This is why we'll be aiming to use 2 of them. We even get some real value out of the static chance to freeze, shock, and ignite as a workaround for Painseeker's downside. But that's not all. Elemental Hit itself does 15% more damage per elemental ailment type on the enemy. Those are some really nice synergies of work. There you have it. 1 Ascendancy Notable calls for a fast attacking build, 1 Ascendancy Notable calls for a hard hitting build, and 1 Ascendancy Notable is more forgiving, yet excels tremendously if you can do both. Last but certainly not least, there's our 4th Ascendancy Notable, Avatar of the Wilds, which ties the other 3 together, both in theme and playstyle, granting Unbound, an on-demand 80% more elemental damage multiplier to the player for duration. All in all, we do an average of 50% more elemental damage to enemies, which have their elemental resistances reduced by 60%, take 100% increased damage on top of that, get max chilled for even more increased damage taken, and stay permanently frozen in most scenarios, scaling their increased damage taken even further as time goes on. Does that sound a bit overpowered to you? I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the Warden has 5 other potential Ascendancy Notable choices, which are geared towards improving tinctures and defenses. Tinctures are very much an unknown quantity at this time, and while they hypothetically may be worth pursuing, it's rather unlikely as the opportunity cost for a ranged build is incredibly steep to begin with. As for defenses, well, we'll get to that later on in the video. For the sake of this video guide, we'll only be focusing on the early endgame non-crit variant for the Warden, but you can find 2 additional fully fleshed out late endgame progression trees, one being for a full crit double inspired learning Legion Blaster setup, and the other being for a full crit Headhunter T17 Juicer setup. These should provide you with a nice blueprint from which to progress your character beyond the initial early endgame phase. When you examine these additional progression trees, be sure to keep the skills, items, and passive trees in alignment with one another to get the proper rundown. The passive skill tree comes fully equipped with a comprehensive leveling breakdown, beginning with Galvanic Arrow into Rain of Arrows on the Deadeye Ascendancy, then picking up Elemental Hit of the Spectrum and respeccing into Warden sometime around the campaign completion, or later if necessary. You can take a look at the notes section for extra information on how to best progress your build. Let's now take a good hard look at the Path Building Configurations tab for the early endgame non-crit variant. Despite this build being designed for mapping purposes, the DPS config is currently optimized for a pinnacle boss fight. This does, however, assume all available buffs, debuffs, totems, and the like are active in the fight, albeit with an average unbound buff uptime taken into account. As we head over to the Calculations tab, you'll notice an exceptionally high chance to freeze, shock, and scorch, crit or no crit. This is in large part due to elemental hit of the Spectrum, granting these ailments half chance on hit right from the get-go. With outbound projectiles and unbound active, we clear the max chill threshold, obviously hit max shock, nearly hit max scorch, and we hit a staggering 40 million ailment threshold for freeze on an enemy that begins at plus 50 cold resistance. This means virtually every enemy in maps will get frozen in just one hit, each time lasting 2 full seconds. So while you're sitting there trying to envision what that looks like in practice, I think now would be a good time to talk about the defensive layers in this build. If you haven't figured it out yet, freeze is the biggest defensive layer. This build could have 1,000,000 EHP and freeze would still be the biggest defensive layer. However, not every single enemy can be frozen and most bosses can only have their action speed cut in half. So what then? Well, if you aren't killing or freezing everything on and off screen, then high evasion through arrow dancing and wind dancer will help protect you from being hit by attacks, especially at range. The combination of wind dancer and kintsugi will do much to protect you from the occasional hit, which allows the evasion entropy system to kick in, all the while giving you ample opportunity to freeze or kill any immediate threats. Against spells, 100% spell suppression is a given, and once again kintsugi can do some heavy lifting here too. By the way, Daraso's Defiance is a nice alternative to kintsugi as it'll serve a similar function in maps and may be easier to acquire. Consider dropping Bone Chill and Culling Strike for a cast when damage taken Immortal Call setup if you go this route. Aside from boss mechanics, the biggest threats for this build will be quick burst incoming spell hits, followed by damage over time. Fortunately, we're already immune to Burning Ground, Ignite, and Poison. The Life Flask can be used to cleanse bleeds and corrupted blood, and further mitigation against damage over time can be achieved with the Pantheon choice, Soul of Our Kali. All things considered, a meager 7k max fizz hit, which is the gold standard for checking the defenses of any given build, is an awfully poor way to judge a character that can kill and or freeze everything on and off screen. Moving on to core skills and mechanics, Elemental Hit of the Spectrum pushes a ton of flat elemental damage with an automatically high chance to inflict elemental ailments and should be qualitied up as soon as possible. It will be our primary attack and is 5-linked with producing the most overall damage and efficiency in mind. Trinity support is automatic and a no-brainer as the strongest damage support option. Returning projectiles proves to be an especially strong support gem here as well, when combined with Pierce on the Tree, Far Shot as a new weapon enchant option, and various other bonuses to far-traveling projectiles. Hitting there and back will also improve Unbound Fury, Shock, and Hoarfrost debuff stack rates. Mirage Archer is a feel-good high-damage support that will double the rate of stacking those same debuffs. The 5th and potential 6th links should involve picking up one or more of the following 3 options. An Artillery Ballista 5-link will significantly boost our single target damage and very quickly ramp up Unbound Fury, Shocks, and Hoarfrost. Both Frenzy and Miro Arrow of Bombarding Clones are mana forged, with the minions contributing even more hits and igniting enemies, further improving the build damage as a whole. Shocks and Ignites are constantly refreshed thanks to Devolved Forces, which is triggered via Hex Touch Elemental Weakness from Rain of Arrows auto-casted, which is also linked to a Bone Chill and Culling Strike for even more damage effectiveness. Every enemy will be shattered on death, resulting in Herald of Ice working overtime in maps. The 2 remaining auras will be responsible for bringing added defense to the build, in the rare case that you should need it. Some map modifiers, like monsters have percentage chance to avoid elemental ailments, will cripple this build overall effectiveness and should be avoided like the plague. Linked in the description of this video is a solid regex to weed out the nastiest of map modifiers in up to T16 maps. Alright, let's talk gear. You've probably noticed this League starter is almost entirely comprised of unique gear. Whereas this might be a turnoff for some people, I'm of the opinion that common unique gear pieces make for some of the very best options for gear slots. This is especially true in regard to newer players, as unique gear simplifies the gearing process, homogenizes the build, and completely removes the RNG from crafting, as well as any confusion associated with designating priority to certain affix roles. The only stipulation is that the uniques are indeed common and relatively cheap on trade. The Taming Ring may be an outlier in this respect due to its anticipated rise in value from all the up-and-coming Wardens eager to get their hands on one. Just know the unique gear pieces chosen for this build were hand-selected with great consideration, weighing their perceived anticipated cost at league start against the value they bring to this build. With that said, you may be surprised to learn not a single one of these specialized gear pieces is absolutely mandatory for the build to be functional. So if you find yourself in the unfortunate situation of being unable to afford a few pieces, then craft some temporary gear and get to farming currency and maps, because this build will be more than capable of doing so, whether it's firing on all cylinders or not. Unlike most bow builds, even the weapon here isn't as important as usual, with so much flat elemental damage sourced from elsewhere, and crit not yet being part of the equation. At any rate, essence crafting is a typical way to make an item like this, and a good fracture can speed up that process significantly. Just make sure it's the highest speed base. One last thing to mention, a rare belt such as this can only be achieved through a high intelligence roll via Essence of Spite. Alright everyone, that is going to conclude the guide. As a result of so many changes coming to the game, there are a bunch of new and exciting builds emerging, both for ranged and melee playstyles, trying to make the most out of the new Warden Ascendancy. My hope is that you now have a sense of how and why this build is poised to be one of the very best league starters to come in the upcoming league. To all the newer PoE players out there, if you've never had the honor of playing bows before, this league is a great opportunity to give it a try. Let's just say, I've been league starting bows for the past 10 leagues straight, and I'm confident that the archetypal ranged playstyle is going to feel a lot safer in maps than in any prior league I've experienced. To all the PoE veterans out there, the most exciting prospect of this build for you will be experiencing something totally new, with an already well-established powerhouse archetype. So if you're setting out to follow this build in 3.25, then good luck. Like always, ample preparation went into refining this build as well as outfitting a character necessary to test its limits. While playtesting the new Ascendancy couldn't be achieved for technical reasons, I hope the footage you've seen here has given you a reasonable expectation of what's to come. Naturally, results may vary depending on the wielder. If you have any questions pertaining to the build, please ask them in the comments section or join in on the discussions likely happening in our Discord right now. More work than ever went into the creation of this particular guide, so please like and subscribe if you wish to see more PoE related content. In the meantime, you can find me on Twitch live streaming this build in action and others like it. Whether you decide to take this build on or not, I sincerely hope this video was of some benefit to you. Thank you for watching, and good luck out there in Rayclast.